we've all worked around some pretty temperamental people, haven't we? Whenever I say that, I look in the audience, I see some smiles, and people are thinking to themselves, he must know her. We all know people like that. On Monday mornings, they show up at work, they look like they just got pulled out of a lake. Some still have their hair still wet. If you say good morning to them, they snarl at you. What's so good about it? Tuesday is much better because there are still 4 more days of work ahead of them. But on Wednesday, they develop a little bit of a smile and make reference to hump day. The week is viewed as a mountain to climb, and now they're at the summit, and on Thursday they begin their descent. On Friday, the smile becomes a little larger and they move around a little quicker because TGIF, thank God it's Friday. Saturday is their best day because on Sunday around noon, they start to twitch because the following day they're going back to the grind. I think one of the greatest qualities associated with an exceptional employee is the ability to accept suggestions. For a lot of people, that's really, really hard. Most people don't want to hear criticism no matter how positively it's spun. It's difficult. I remember when my daughter Mary Cecile was 3 years old, she'd done something wrong, and I sat her down at the kitchen table. And for 5 minutes, I tried to explain the error of her ways. And after I was done, I did that typical parent thing. I said, young lady, do you have anything to say for yourself? She looked at me and she said, yeah, I don't like you, and I've never liked you. So often in life, we prejudge. And in time, we discover that our judgments are absolutely wrong. A few years ago, I was talking to a group of 200 women in my hometown of Brookings, South Dakota. And shortly after I began speaking, I noticed a woman probably about 85 years old in the front row, and she didn't look like she was having a good time at all. In fact, she looked like she was sucking on a pickle. And so I was watching her and realized, I'm not getting to her, but my favorite line was coming along, and I knew it. And I thought, if she doesn't break on this one, there's no hope. And so I looked at her and I gave the punchline, and she looked at me. I thought, okay, I'm sorry. Well, when the applause ended, she was the first one up. She put out her hand. She shook my hand, and she said, I got to thank you. I haven't laughed that hard in years. Not long ago, I was on an airplane between Savannah, Georgia, and Atlanta. And it was a horrible ride. Bumpiest plane ride I'd ever had. Everyone was praying to something. There were no atheists on that airplane. The pilot had come on and said that the flight attendants weren't going to be delivering any beverages. That's how tough it was. And after hanging over Atlanta in a hole pattern for a while, we started to descend through the clouds. You couldn't see anything. Plane get pushed around. About a minute from landing, the pilot comes on and says, ladies and gentlemen, this is the captain. Somebody's on their cell phone. If it's you, knock it off. Flight attendants, find that person. Ladies and gentlemen, if you were sitting by that person, tell them to knock it off. I can't hear the tower. Those flight attendants ran down that aisle, found the young lady 10 rows behind me. And was I mad at her at that moment? You bet. But I was also mad at the people who sat beside her, watched her pick up her telephone and call someone a minute before we landed. There are some things in life that are too important that can't be ignored. And the news is filled with these things that all of a sudden they pop out at the end. No, when we see something, we have to talk. We have to talk. For 10 years, I lived in Kansas City, Missouri, and I had a neighbor. And that neighbor's name was Fred. About 60 years old, tall, skinny guy, always wore white t-shirts and blue jeans. And Fred was always mowing his grass. Don't you hate neighbors who are always mowing their grass? Because that means that you got to mow yours too. Anyway, once in a while I'd go over and stop Fred, and he'd shut down the motor of that mower, and we'd walk over to the steps leading up to his house, and he'd pull a pack of cigarettes out of his pocket, light one up, and he'd start down some philosophical path. He was kind of like that guy Wilson in the old Home Improvement television show, looking above the fence. Well, one day I stopped Fred, and he walked over to the steps of his house. He sat down, pulled out a pack of cigarettes, pulled in 2 lungs full of smoke, and he said something absolutely profound. He said the difference between right and wrong is simple. Most kids can figure it out. It's the application that's difficult. 25 years after watching that smoke come out of Fred's mouth, I can still hear the wisdom of his words. It's the application, having the courage to do the right thing. That's difficult. I believe that the most important word in the English language is the word care. C-A-R-E, the word care. It says everything about you. How much you care about your job, how much you care about your family, how much you care about your friends, how much you care about your community. Every day we are judged by how much we care, because we judge other people based on the same thing. A couple years ago, my wife and I were in a town just north of Oklahoma City. We checked into a motel about 9:30 at night, and about 10 minutes to 3, the telephone rings. And my wife picks it up, and I hear her say, oh, okay. And she hangs up, and I said, what was that about? And she said, that was a lady at the front desk. Evidently, a tornado warning has been issued, and if we hear the siren, we're supposed to jump in the bathtub. Wow, 10 minutes to 3, you hear something like that? Well, sure enough, 2 minutes later, that siren sounded, and that woman from the desk ran up and down the hallway, banging on doors, yelling, get in the bathtub! Get in the bathtub! So I put my pants on and I assumed the position in the tub. My wife jumps in, and we're looking at it thinking, holy cow! Is this house going to end? In a bathtub in Oklahoma? About 10 minutes later, the woman came down the hallway because the siren had stopped, and she said, all clear. All clear. I thought about it. I would imagine it was in that woman's job description that if a tornado warning had been issued, she needed to contact the guests by phone. But I don't think it said you had to be Paul Revere. I'll stay at that hotel every time because that woman cared. A few years ago, after I got done speaking at a conference, a man walked up to me. He looked just like Santa Claus. He said, my name is Roger. I'm 62 years old. I drive a school bus. He said, let me tell you what happened last Christmas. Last Christmas, I wanted to do something nice for the 32 kids I had on my school bus, and so I went out and bought 32 brown bags. I got 32 cans of soda pop. I got 32 candy bars. And I put a can of soda pop and a candy bar in each one of those bags. 32 kids, 32 bags. Roger said on the second to the last day of school before Christmas, as I was dropping my kids off out in the country, I'd stop my bus. I'd whirl around in my seat, and as each child walked down that aisleway, I handed each child a bag. 32 kids, 32 bags. Only 5 said thank you. 5. Then Roger said, do you know that 2 of the 5 kids that said thank you to me, they were from the poorest family on my bus line? And those 2 kids from that poor family got back on my bus the next day, the last day of school before Christmas. It was a little boy and a little girl. As each one of those kids stepped onto the bus, they handed Roger a homemade thank you card. Big Roger standing there, the tears just rolling down his cheeks into his beard. You know, there's a saying in Arkansas, there's no shame in being poor, but there is shame in having poor ways. 2 kids grown up outside of that town that will never be poor a day in their lives because they understand the importance of being grateful, being thankful. It's life-changing to be grateful.